Welcome, please welcome John Stossel.
Thank you, Joe. So I'm relieved to hear from Roy that we're not all going to burn up. I have no expertise in climate science, so why am I here, and why doesn't Al Gore invite me to any of his events? I think it just happened because I stayed on the beat. I was a consumer reporter for over 35 years, and you really have to be an imbecile to not get it eventually, to not see that the scares come from good scientists often, one after the other. And in every case, there are passionate people who are just convinced that this is going to kill us and have good science, it seems, to back it up, certainly good enough to convince us laymen. And it took me many years to report on the scares before I saw the trend. But if you think about what we've gone through, some of you were old enough to remember the cranberry scare of 1959. I was too young to remember that one, but then came DDT, cyclamates, saccharin, the nitrites in bacon, they're giving everybody cancer. Red dye number 2, hair dyes were giving everybody cancer. Alar in apples, electric blankets were poisoning people. Computer terminals, 1989, cell phones, it's right up by your ear, and the brain tumors, the guy in Sweden had the good data to show that people got the brain tumors on the side of their head where they held their cell phones. And there were endless scare stories about these things, but we forget about them because when the crisis doesn't come, our brains don't remember. I think it's part of our evolutionary survival skills. One after the other, SARS, West Nile virus, Y2K, remember, it was going to crash all the computers, the planes were going to go down. The killer bees were coming up from Mexico, they were all going to sting us all to death. Bird flu. So this made me skeptical later in my career, though I was guilty of some of these things. It's part of the mainstream media's problem that more of you are going to watch if I say, tonight on 2020, global warming will kill you, than if I say it won't. And I did the pesticide stories, danger in the grass from ChemLaw and lawn chemicals. And something horrible had happened, probably an allergic reaction. A guy's skin peeled off after playing golf at a course that had just been sprayed. These bad ideas and this gullible reporting from us of some of these bad ideas have nasty consequences. The biggest probably is DDT. I mean, Sri Lanka had 2.8 million cases of malaria, and most of it's 2 million deaths a year. And then they started using DDT. A tiny amount sprayed on the edge of a hut will kill mosquitoes for almost half a year. I mean, far less than was ever used in the United States. They reduced their malaria cases to 17 in 1963. And then the bad science from the hysterical environmentalists got them to stop using DDT. They're back up to more than 2 million cases of DDT per year. Bad ideas have consequences. The other one was just the general scare over pesticides. And you may have forgotten this, but the hysteria was causing all kinds of effects. People were blaming it for the cancer epidemic, and frogs are having shrinking their testicles are shrinking. We're all going to go sterile. And most Americans believe there is a cancer epidemic. There is no cancer epidemic. Cancer rates are flat or going down. We only hear more about it because we live long enough to get cancer. But from the bad reporting, you would never know that. Some of the other consequences, the hysteria over asbestos. I mean, the risk of getting mesothelioma from asbestos was hard to find out. They found it in the workers who worked in shipyards, and they were working, if you saw the pictures, in what looked like a snowstorm. They were inhaling that much asbestos. And even then, they had trouble teasing out whether it was really the asbestos causing the problem or smoking, and because most of these guys also smoked. But to say that the asbestos that might be in the walls of this hotel is going to hurt us is just nonsense. But that didn't stop all over America from billions being spent to tear it out of walls. In New York City, they closed the schools for a few weeks to tear it out of the walls. The kids were in far more danger from not being in school and playing in the streets than they were from the asbestos. But the policymakers don't think that way. The fear of chemicals led to the Love Canal and Times Beach, Missouri disasters. They plowed over the entire city, covered the town with dirt because there were tiny amounts of dioxin in the soil in Times Beach. Further research showed that they can't find any effect, any sickness from these chemicals. But they're now spending on these Superfund sites more than the National Cancer Institute spends on cancer research. Right now in New York City, there are wonderful new artificial turf playgrounds. It's what the Giants and the Jets and most of the pro teams, most of the Division I sports teams play on. I was at a Central Park Board meeting yesterday where I was told that they're stopping the building of these because the hysterics have decided the little pieces of rubber tire in there, which it's true, if you shredded it and inhaled vast amounts of it, would cause harm. It might hurt the children. Now, the fact that a grass field has to deal with pesticides, now we're not worried so much about the pesticides. They've moved on. And the fact that those grass fields can only be used half the year and they have to be closed when it rains and the kids then don't get to play and they get fatter and they get diabetes, that doesn't count in these equations. They've stopped building the playgrounds. So many of these bad ideas are spread by the mainstream media, which is why it's exciting to see a conference like this. Since some of you have been here, you may not have seen some of the press coverage about it. Joe alluded to some of it. I think one of the surprisingly good stories, I agree, is the Washington Post. She at least quoted Lord Monckton, talked about King Canute telling the tide not to come in. At least there was some fair portrayal. On the other hand, most of the article, most of the quotes were from critics. She goes to Clean Air Watch. Several climate scientists and environmental advocates poked fun at the meeting. Clean Air Watch gets its smear in, the League of Conservation Voters, and Michael Oppenheimer. They go to the usual suspects. Joe called this victory, "I just wish I had his optimism." Goes on, "It's believed to be the first time a direct link has emerged between anti-global warming skeptics funded by the oil industry and the opponents of scientific evidence showing that passive smoking can damage people's health." What? I know, it makes little sense, but Joe, from energy companies, you get, what, less than 5% of the money for the Heartland Institute, and you have gotten less than 2% of your money from companies that had some investment in tobacco. But this is how they smear you if you disagree with the groupthink. On the other hand, money can only come from a limited number of places. You can get it from the government, and the people who get that tend to be people who want more government. Or you can get it from individuals or business. And is business evil? Doesn't business have free speech too? And then there's the New York Times. There's this young guy, Andrew Revkin, who's been covering this subject for a long time. It's interesting. He always calls it man-induced. He doesn't call it global warming. He says human-induced global warming, as if it's just a fact. His front page stories get a lot of attention. I noticed his coverage Sunday on maybe there's cooling now, but we can't overgeneralize from that. That was on page A28. That article wasn't that bad. The worst article was today. It just includes these little smears. Pat Michaels, a speaker, a climatologist with a paid position at the anti-regulatory Cato Institute. He quotes a Riley Dunlap, a sociologist at Oklahoma State University, who mocks an event like this, says it's designed to foster the impression of little Davids battling the Goliath of the environmental establishment. And then the last smear, the meeting was largely framed around science. But after the luncheon, when an organizer made an announcement asking all the scientists in the large hall to move to the front for a group picture, 19 men did so. Now this, I'm told, was yesterday, and it did happen that way, largely because most people had already left the meeting. And certainly there are more than 19 scientists here. The socialist media, maybe they will just never get it. Their worldview is anti-capitalist. von Mises wrote about it in 1972, and it's just very hard to change. I would also argue in the scientific community as well. But I thank you for working hard to at least educate us in the mainstream media. And really, we're not all evil. We just are dumb. And it's important that you make the effort to get through that dumb layer. And in my reporting on this, I've seen a few of you who have really done it well. Some of you are brilliant scientists, but you can't talk worth a damn. Many of you, in fact. But look, you can learn to do this better. And a few of you who broke through my ignorance, one was Pat Michaels in an interview, who just said, you know, yes, this might be happening, but climate changes. It's always changed. So it wasn't that he had to make a long speech. It was 2 words. It was the way he said it, with the emphasis. Climate changes. And then you're ready to listen to the facts about how it always has, how Greenland was called Greenland for a reason. And this opens even a limited reporter's brain. Another guy who did it was Paul Ryder, who pointed out, you know, it's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Again, it was just the emphasis. It's the Intergovernmental Panel. Who joins it? Who joins government panels? It's the environmental zealots who want to run your life. The emphasis. John Christie talking about his charity work in Africa, where he says, you know who's really going to suffer from this? We've got billions of people on Earth who live on $1 or $2 a day. I've seen them. And if we pass draconian limits on carbon, we are going to wreck their lives. And that's going to hurt the world far more than global warming ever will. Speaking personally, speaking with emphasis, I beg you to do it, because if the scaremongers win and they're wrong, we will certainly all suffer. So I kept my speech short so we could have plenty of time for questions, if you like. So I'll stop there and take questions. She has a microphone. Thank you. Okay, whoever has the mic, why don't you just go ahead?
Okay.
He has it back there.
Yeah, Stan Goldenberg, Hurricane Research Division. As I get more educated in this overall area, it's not my area of specialty, I'm talking more and more to fellow scientists, trying to convince them. How much time and what is your success in talking to fellow journalists about this and using the sound bites you mentioned to try and convince them?
I've had little success convincing my fellow journalists. They generally ignore me. I won 19 Emmy Awards when I was bashing business as a consumer reporter, and I have won none since. So they no longer listen to me. In my myth book, I rudely put the global warming chapter in there with psychics and astrologers, but that was before the last IPCC report came out, so I would say it's probably unfair.
John Stossel, there have been scares before, but it seems there's something new here. The amount of coordination between journalists and celebrities and politicians and corporations and scientific and government-funded research, and most uniquely, the amount of emotional investment that people on the other side have in this debate. I mean, when you had the Alar scare, people who said the apples are safe were never called Alar deniers. They were never threatened with death. I mean, it seems to me at least, that something unique is happening here, but you've been on the outside of these covering them. What's your impression?
I agree with you. I mean, I disagree in that I think the people who said the apples were safe were called poison deniers, but this is much bigger. It's like a religious movement, and in some ways it's good that we're that fat and wealthy that we can afford to get that indignant about this. It's become, and others have talked about this, like a secular religion, and the sacrament is to make some tiny pointless gesture, like you buy a fluorescent light bulb or a Prius, and then you feel good about protecting the world. there's more that everybody can do on this, so you can feel like you're being involved. And we like to feel alarmed. It makes us feel alive. If you're scared of bird flu, you feel like you're paying attention to what's going on in the world. But this is something where you can do two things. You can do a tiny pointless gesture yourself and use less toilet paper. And you can indulge your hatred of business, evil business, which, again, von Mises had it right. And as I've done my consumer reporting, just to elaborate on that, I think what's fueling a lot of this is people's general hatred of capitalism. Somebody came up to me on the street in New York and said, "You John Stossel?" "Yes." "I hope you die soon." And at first I thought people had this feeling because they thought of me as a conservative. But and to be a conservative in New York is like being a child molester. But I'm a libertarian, and I hold a lot of beliefs that the liberals around here hold, so I'm trying to figure out what's the hatred. It's because I'm a consumer reporter defending business, and people hate business. So I'm trying to understand, why do they hate business so much? I thought some people have said it's the envy of the wealth, that some people have so much more. And they think of it as a zero-sum game, that if Bill Gates has billions, it means we have that much less. When in fact, it isn't. It makes us all wealthier. But the truth is, it isn't just the envy of the wealth, because if you look at the kings and queens of England, people didn't hate them. They revered them. But they hated the bourgeoisie. They hated the very people who sold them the stuff they needed to make their lives better. In our intuitive understanding of this zero-sum game, if you made a profit on me, I must have lost. That economic ignorance makes people hate business. And I think this global warming movement feeds on that.
Yeah, hi, John. I'm Tom Harris with the International Climate Science Coalition. One of the things we have to do is try to design media policies or media strategies to try and help the reporting be less biased. Couldn't be more biased. And what we're trying to understand, for example, is what percentage, generally speaking, of reporters who report on this issue actually really believe that we're headed towards a climate crisis versus those who just go with the flow.
I haven't surveyed the field. I know Bill Blakemore, who covers it for ABC, deeply and passionately believes it, to the point where he will just talk my ear off about it. So I would think he would attend a conference like this and hear from skeptics. Are you here, Bill?
Yeah, I am.
You are?
Yeah, I am.
There he is. Good
John.
for Bill.
Russell Seitz here. Roy has produced an extraordinary piece of scientific work. Roy Spencer has produced an extraordinary piece of scientific work that's actually going to change minds. The last thing I expected to hear at this conference. I'm amazed. But the question is, as he pointed out, he wrote a pretty interesting paper, got it through peer review, 2 cheers for peer review, but no reporters called. Meanwhile, in the real world, National Geographic takes the worst end of the silliest climate modeling in recent history and makes maybe a $20 million special out of it. What can we do to forget the sound science, the damn good science that we are seeing from guys like Roy, and getting it on prime time?
Boy, I don't know. My co-anchor is doing a piece on the National Geographic special. I mean, all you can do is speak up and say what you believe, hope people will listen. Yes, sir.
Oh, hello. This is Art Horn, John, a 29-year meteorologist mostly with NBC. Do you think that the way that information is being communicated now in so many different ways than when we started in television, that is having a very strong pressure on the news directors and the reporters to come up with more sensational doom and gloom scenario stories to get attention?
Well, yes and no. There's always been that pressure. It's the nature of news to be bad. If the plane crashes, it's big news. If it's a miracle that all those planes fly around next to each other and don't hit each other, but that's not news. Nobody's out by the back fence gossiping about who's being faithful to their spouse. Alarmism is the news. I think it's always been there. It's just that now that there are more media. And the bigger injustice equal to global warming, the anti-nuclear hysteria, that NASA is afraid even to say they use nuclear power in their rockets because they think that'll turn the public against them. Or the hysteria that goes on over sex crimes and child molestation merely because a pretty blonde girl gets molested. There's a lot of bad reporting out there, but I think there's always been bad reporting. There's just more of it. More media. And more media in general is good.
Over here, I'm John Quapis. I'm an ex-foundation director, former national field director for the American Security Council, and a general overall troublemaker. Regarding our combating, as it were, the opposition, the man-made global warming believers, would it be useful, coming out of this meeting, to try to start organizing ourselves on a statewide basis? And we have many states represented here, many eminent scientists who could participate in such an organization on a statewide basis, a New York or Wisconsin or a Virginia Council on Climate Change. That would be a source within your state to provide information, accurate information, to the media, to the policymakers, the legislature, to schools in your states. Is this something that sounds practical or not? And could the Heartland Institute perhaps help in getting people together for this?
Maybe. I'm a reporter, not a policy strategist, and I would never want to advise you on that. I would just say that to me, the most direct, clearly useful thing you can do is to pay attention to your local media. And the reporters want to get it right. They're busy, they're covering a lot of stuff. But if you see somebody getting it wrong, and you just call them up or write them a letter and say, not, look stupid, but here's why you have it wrong, and say it clearly. Many reporters get no feedback from their stories. And one-on-one, working on the people who cover the environmental beat, if you're a scientist and you see the inaccuracies, speaking up does make a difference.
Mr. Stossel, as a former expert in scare stories, would you recommend fighting scare stories with a different kind of fear, namely spelling out exactly to the public that it's not going to cut it if they change light bulbs and think about buying a hybrid, but that fighting the greatest threat to mankind ever, happening the day after tomorrow, might require military wartime type economy with rationing and house inspections and drafting teenagers to build levees?
Yes, I think that the downside of doing what it would really take to drastically limit our production of carbon dioxide, if that would make a difference, hasn't been well explained.
John, Ken Malloy, Center for the Study of Carbon and Energy Markets. At the risk of being the skunk at the party, I'd like to challenge the organization here that maybe it is in the DNA of libertarians and people with strong orientations towards individual responsibility not to organize effectively. I notice, no, I'm serious. I notice that on the collectivist side, in fact, even just using the word collectivist suggests an orientation toward being more open to mutual support and the like. I have been an activist now in conservative causes, and I find it very difficult sometimes to get people to join together for purposes of effective political action. And I challenge people to think seriously about whether we're being sufficiently supportive of one another.
Well, we libertarians say that's the beauty of freedom, that if individuals don't want to, they don't have to.
Hey, John, I'm Robert Wagner, the Internet Skeptic. Can there be a silver lining to all this? Because at least in my lifetime, this is the first time I've seen the government, academia, and the media all team up on an issue where, as many people here have said, we may be going into a cooling area. So this may be a great way to totally discredit them, and this could be the next Heaven's Gate group.
This could be the next what?
Heaven's Gate. You know how all those people bought into the spaceship?
Well, my understanding is that we can't overgeneralize from this cooling either. I don't know what to say to that. The good news is that despite, let's say they win, let's say it's pointless and we all pay unnecessarily higher gas taxes, the animal spirits of capitalism have survived a lot of this stuff before and these other scares. Some people will be hurt, but for the most part, things get better.
Thank you very much for speaking this evening. I'm a high school science teacher. I used to believe in global warming until I saw Al Gore's movie. So that prompted me to actually investigate it, and this is a commentary on what we can do about it. Willie Soon, Bob Carter, Ian Clark, Roy Spencer, John Christie, every single one of those names I'm familiar with because I saw them on an internet video, free, accessible anytime, anywhere, and I could email it to everyone I know. So kids today, especially, I'm a high school teacher, I can tell you, they don't even know the TV exists sometimes. Their world is completely internet-based, and they're exchanging information at a rate we can never imagine. So I would say a strategy might be, we don't really have to organize. We just have to make the statement in something that's professional, well done, and put it up there, and it will take care of itself in a large sense. And something that's scientifically worthwhile, no kind of scare stories or anything, because we could lose our credibility as well, of course. So I'd say this, and also if you could, professionals, people that who are experts in the field, if you could go to the local communities and the high schools, they are ready to listen, they just don't have another side of the story to hear. So please, if you could do that. I'm going to give a talk at the end of this month in my high school, and it took a year to get that to happen. The social studies department plays his movie, the English department plays his movie, the Spanish department plays his movie. I'm the only single person that has shown a contrary view, or have been critical of what I've seen in that movie, and that's been going on for about a year. So I could say there is definitely serious indoctrination going on, and it's not all willful, they're just ignorant. As you say, we're pretty much dumb. Okay, so please keep that in mind as I leave it. Thank you.
Just to make one observation about that, you're totally right about the internet and the new world, in that I did an internet interview with Ron Paul, and ABC will put its resources behind it, and abc.com is a pretty big internet operation. But within weeks, I had 50,000 views on ABC and hundreds of thousands of views on YouTube, where people stole it and reposted it. And YouTube is huge.
I'd just like to comment on that, John. I'm one of the scientists mentioned there, Bob Carter. I've been a lifetime academic, teaching in universities, giving talks to Rotary clubs and so on. Average audience, 10 to 30, 40 people. You add all that up, before I retired recently, I might have reached 50,000 people in my professional lifetime. A video, so a talk I gave on climate change, was posted on YouTube, I might say without my permission. To my astonishment, it's just past 80,000 viewings. That's more than I've reached in my entire professional lifetime. That puts that in context. Another piece of context is that a video on YouTube on Britney Spears' knickers.
Yes. I'm Doug Flanagan with the Committee for Constructive Tomorrow, and we are working in Uganda, among other countries, and just yesterday I heard Roy Innes from the Congress of Racial Equality and met his cousin, Sarah Boyens, who's also working in Uganda, and it's amazing. John, we're over here on this side. On the, your left.
Ah, okay.
Oh, yeah. And
everybody was looking over there.
I understand. And so, what we're dealing with is, people who don't even have access to electricity, don't have access to roads and all these other, amenities that we take for granted. And in fact, we're willing to cut back, many of our people are willing to cut drastically back on in order to solve this great crisis. And yet, we have the compassion of people around the world saying we need to help the poor. But at the same time, a leading theologian who was a personal friend of mine, who said, well, you know, we really can't afford to let these people have electricity because it will affect the global warming. And I mean, I'm serious. This is a serious statement by a serious friend of mine I've known for 30 years, 35 years. How do you know, it's like these people are friends of Mr. Blakemore, I think. I don't know. But I know that they're friends of some major people in this country. And there's a whole youth movement out there who doesn't understand that the consequences of this movement will not help the poor, and in fact, that some of their leaders are not interested in helping the poor in those ways.
I think that person was unusually honest in saying we can't let them have electricity. I think most Americans feel, oh yes, we can just feel good and use a little less paper and buy a fluorescent light bulb and it'll all be solved.
John, Paul Reiter here. I'm the person who noted that the insect Mr. Gore labeled as a mosquito happened to be a wasp. It's got its sticker in the wrong end. There are two words that I think injure us a lot in this issue. The first is skeptic. We are all skeptics, but skeptic is misinterpreted as being some kind of aberration in terms of what science is about. And the other is consensus. This is what really hurts, I think, about the IPCC, that they talk always about the consensus of all the world's scientists. As we've discussed already, consensus is the stuff of politics. It's not science. It seems to me a very important aspect of this whole issue is that the public simply doesn't understand the scientific method and the scientific process. How do you think that the media might, in some way, educate the public in science?
Forget about it. Science is boring. Science, the masses will rarely be able to process, and they will want to know, what's the consensus? Just tell me what to do. I think it's too big a job to solve that.
Well, that's
keep trying, please.
John, Shannon Gessling from Southeastern Legal Foundation over here. Thank you for being here. From your perspective, you indicated that you did 35 years of consumer reporting and you shifted in your perspective. Actually, I would love to have an audience like this for my jury, but that's not who we have. So my question to you is, what, if anything, changed your mind on this issue as not only a reporter with access to information, but also as a presenter of the information?
Well, my conversion was gradual, and it was, as I said, because I stayed on the beat. And I came out of Princeton in 1969. I was taught that government had the answer to poverty, and we just need to have these wise elites come in to poor neighborhoods, and they would fix the problem. I got to stay there and watch what happened to those programs 5 years later. I kept covering the scares and saw how they enriched bureaucrats, but they didn't really solve the problem. They killed people by diverting resources from other things that were more dangerous. Then I started saying, I'm not getting the full story from the New York Times, and I started reading Reason magazine and Hayek and von Mises, and it changed my worldview. So when the global warming scare came along, I was already in touch with people from CEI or Cato, so at least I heard there was another side, and having seen so many phony scares, I was open-minded to it. But I don't know how you apply that to a general population unless you can force everyone to read Reason magazine.
Just one more final question.
Why is it that the media is so quick to condemn so many people in this room by suggesting that they're corrupted by money from the fossil fuel industry, when it's the obvious part is that the money is so much heavy on the other side?
Because people don't know that the money is much heavier on the other side. They don't know that liberal think tanks outspend conservative ones 7-1. And it's how I felt when I was first a reporter. The DDT activist would come to me, and he would be in blue jeans. And he had long hair. He was a hippie. He was like me. He was one of my guys. And then there would be the spokesman from business who was in a suit. And we just have a bias. He's in it for the money. And look how Heartland's being smeared. I mean, Heartland argues that the data on passive smoke is weak. It is weak. To do it, the EPA had to look at hundreds of studies. They found 3 where they found some damage. And those were people who lived with smokers, who were in the car with them, who were in homes with them, breathing the secondhand smoke all the time. And from that, they found a minuscule increase in smoking diseases. And from that, we have this whole ban all smoking everywhere movement. People are inclined to think the worst of industry, of capitalism. Capitalism lifted more people out of the mud and misery than any system ever. It continues to do that. Hundreds of millions of people now have been lifted out of the stoop labor and short and brutal life that existed before capitalism. Their lives are so much better. It could benefit the other 2 billion people who still live on $1 or $2 a day, and yet that very system is vilified in the elite universities and newsrooms of America. Go figure. Please change it. Thank you very much.
I would really like to thank each and every person in this room here today, especially our 100+ speakers and our dozens of co-sponsors for having the courage and the fortitude to let your views and your voices be heard. So thank you very much. Also, I was very pleased to hear so much sentiment for us to continue the momentum from this conference, not to let this be a one-time occasion where we all go our own ways. I can assure you that Joe Bast and I and many others will be brainstorming very much over the coming weeks, the coming months. Many, probably most of you, have communicated with me via email or telephone over the past couple of months. I encourage you to continue doing so. We welcome all the input we can to keep this momentum going. We certainly would like to do events like this. We can only do something this large every now and then, but even in smaller scale, as much as possible. Thank you so much. The most important message we have to share, that we have to give to the media and to each other, is that scientific discussion is a wonderful thing. It's not something to be suppressed. It's not something to be shouted down. And every one of you here in this room today has ensured that scientific inquiry, scientific investigation, the scientific method will always live. And I thank you very much. Hopefully we'll do this again soon. Have a wonderful week. Stay in touch.